Resuming debate, the honourable member for Red Deer-Lacombe.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure for me to rise today to speak to Bill C-64, but before I go any further, I'd like to let you know that I'll be splitting my time with my good friend and colleague from Souris Moose Mountain. And Madam Speaker, the debate today is about C-64. It's an act regarding Pharmacare. At least that's what everybody is being told that is what it's about. I would rather call it, I guess, the so-called Pharmacare bill, because I think this is the cost of keeping the Parliament going bill. It's probably a name that's already been used. But this bill is very, very tepid. It's not a national Pharmacare program. This is actually just a piece of legislation that is meant to check a box to keep a supply and confidence agreement in place. Now, to the NDP, I can't believe that they actually think that this is the Pharmacare bill that they envision. I haven't met a program that the NDP wouldn't actually want to nationalize, but they say it's a very, very sad day. They say it's a very, very sad day when you
there seems to be some cross discussion and from one end of the chamber to the other, and so I just want to remind members, okay, I see that it's in front. I apologize for that. I just want to say it's disturbing when someone is trying to speak. It disturbs them, and so I just want to ask members to please be respectful. The honourable member for Red Deer-Lacombe.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. So I guess the words I was trying to find is there's the joke that goes around. It says it's not how much. It's not knowing that a politician can be bought. It's knowing how little they'll let themselves go for. So if you're in the NDP caucus right now and you're thinking this is what the misery that they're suffering in the polls, the misery that they're suffering nationwide, the same misery that Canadians are suffering, this is all they managed to get out of the supply and confidence arrangement with the government today. So. And it's not, Madam Speaker, it's not a Pharmacare program. Healthcare is actually the provincial jurisdiction. It should be delivered by the provinces, and simply adding diabetes, some diabetes measures into it, which is, I guess, on the surface of it, a good thing, and contraceptives, but to the tune of $1.5 billion. And I'll remind viewers watching at home, if you actually believe this is all it's going to cost, I'll remind you that the government bought a $7 billion pipeline and built it for about $40 billion. So if the history is any predictor of the future when it comes to what things cost under a Liberal-NDP coalition, then you should be looking at least that example, if not more. And to us as Conservatives, the issue is one of provincial jurisdiction. I come from Alberta. This is a very important issue to our province, to our Premier. This is just another intrusion into provincial jurisdiction. And we think that during these financial times when Canadians are struggling to make ends meet, pouring more fuel on the inflationary fire is certainly not going to help. It's another financial albatross, I think, in the making that Canadians can't afford and are not willing to pay for. And it's not just me that's saying this, it's not just Conservatives that are saying this. John Ivison eloquently stated in a piece that he published back on February 29th when this bill first came out and this notion came out. He says, "This is the woebegone child of a loveless Liberal-NDP marriage." And that's basically what we're dealing with, Madam Speaker. It's become clear to me that this bill is basically the cost of keeping the NDP's support until this Parliament, until the Supply and Confidence and the coalition partners can take this until October of 2025. It was supposed to be October 20th. It's going to be extended by another week to make sure that certain people here get the financial benefits that they think that they're entitled to. But it just goes to show that there is only one serious opposition in this House, and that is the Conservative Party. And the NDP is not an opposition party, but they're basically a willing accomplice to everything that the Liberal government has in its agenda. And they have been winning partners in creating a massive inflationary deficit, setting restrictive policies towards, for example, lawful gun owners, natural health products. signed up for that 2 years ago without even knowing the NDP was going to vote in favor of that in Bill C-47 last year, impeding on provincial jurisdiction time and time again, which is, of course, front and center with this piece of legislation, continuing to cover up for the government's scandals, covering up for them at committee, but also here in the House of Commons, introducing soft-on-crime legislation or supporting that soft-on-crime legislation that's turned our justice system into a revolving door, sending Canadians to food banks en masse, a couple million visitors, and now where it's up over 300%, allowing housing prices to skyrocket and neglecting our military to the point where our soldiers are basically relying on food donations while they're in Ottawa for training. I could continue, Madam Speaker, but I've only got 10 minutes, but I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. It's bad enough that the NDP has backed budget after budget and shut down our work to hold the government to account at committee, but they're telling Canadians that they're doing their actual work as an opposition party. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't be in opposition while you support everything that the government does. I don't buy it, Madam Speaker, and neither do Canadians. A December 2023 Leger poll indicated that only 18% of Canadians listed the establishment of a national Pharmacare program as a healthcare priority, and the promise was not included in the 2021 Liberal platform. Canadians did not vote for a party promising Pharmacare, yet here we are thanks to an NDP party that is keeping this weak and basically lame duck government in office. And no wonder, Madam Speaker, that some provinces are already saying publicly that they're choosing to opt out. Let it be known that the absence of the NDP as an opposition is also keenly felt in other areas. Just last year, as I was mentioning, the NDP Liberal coalition passed Bill C-47. I don't suppose anybody in the NDP was told when they signed on to this supply and confidence agreement back in 2022 in, I believe it was March, that they would be asked to actually regulate natural health products the same as therapeutics. But they did it anyway. As a matter of fact, they made that commitment. They made that commitment a year before that bill was actually passed. And it's going to basically shut down our supplements and our natural health product industry when they get classified and rebranded as pharmaceutical drugs. And what did the NDP do when this came up for debate? Well, they backed the budget instead of forcing the government to remove those clauses, 4 little clauses from Bill C-47, Budget and Implementation Act. The NDP had a chance. They could have flexed their muscles, said we weren't going to support this Budget Implementation Act unless you remove that, but no such request was forthcoming, and that bill passed, and it's caused unforeseen chaos in the natural health products and supplements industry across this country, and consumers, of course, are rightly worried. So in response, Madam Speaker, I had to table my own private member's bill, C-368, to reverse these changes. And this is just part and parcel. The NDP says one thing to Canadians, but they actually do another. Could you imagine such a thing as standing up, if you're the House Leader of the NDP, for example, standing up and saying time and time again for the 18 years that he and I have been in this House together, how much he doesn't like omnibus legislation, and yet gleefully passed Bill C-47 and told the government that they're going to continue to pass every budget and every Budget Implementation Act henceforth after March of 2022. So you can't have it both ways. You can't stand up and say we're going to hold the government to account while continuing to give them the keys to the House and to the government and do whatever they want. So in the case of natural health product governance and regulations, they tell Canadians that they're against omnibus legislation and that they're keeping the government accountable, but in turn, like I said, voted for C-47 and actually threw that industry into turmoil, and then criticized me for giving them an off-ramp on C-368 debate last week when I'm giving them a pathway to redemption, and all they could do is basically blame Stephen Harper for the mess that the country is in. It's just, I can't even make this stuff up, Madam Speaker. And Canadians are asking, this is the most common question I get, is when are we going to have an election? And who would believe anything anybody in the NDP had to say anymore when the actions are completely 100%, 180 degrees opposite of what they do in their actions with what they say with their words. And it should also be highlighted that this bill has been introduced with no public consultations whatsoever. So this comes as no surprise to Conservatives. This piece of legislation has been pushed from a government with a terrible record on transparency. It's a government that regularly rushes massive changes with little regard for whom these changes may impact. They talk about the intended consequences, but they never fully understand the unintended consequences of the things that they do, which is why we're in the mess that we're in today. Conservative position on C-64. Liberals know that this project is an expensive boondoggle. That's why they abandoned it in their 2019 election promise. And even former Finance Minister Bill Morneau noted in his book that a single-user system would cost an additional $15 billion a year. You can't believe the $1.5 billion number. And that's why, Madam Speaker, myself, and I know my colleagues here on the Conservative side, will respect provincial jurisdiction and will actually vote against this piece of legislation. And we encourage the NDP to change their ways before their party actually fades into oblivion forever. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Government Deputy House Leader.
So, Madam Speaker, I've heard a number of Conservatives use the same line. Only 18%, 1 out of every 5 Canadians think that this should be a priority. So I guess the fact that 1 out of every 5 needs something, that's not enough for the Conservatives. Okay, what is their number? When does it warrant a program? If it's not 1 out of every 5 Canadians, is it 2 out of every 5? Is it 3? Is it 4? Or is it when everybody demands this program? Can the member just tell me, if 1 out of 5 Canadians needing this is not good enough for him, what number will they realize, or will they accept that, yes, it is good enough for Canadians?
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Healthcare delivery is provincial jurisdiction. The private healthcare that's out there right now, the private insurance that's already out there, are already talking about how their systems and their programs, which deliver tremendous results for Canadians, are going to be undercut, and it's actually going to lead to a public system that's not going to offer the same value and benefits that the private system already does. So we're going to respect provincial jurisdiction. It's too bad that this government has squandered $600 billion in debt and the debt servicing that goes along with it, that we're actually spending more on servicing our debt than we are on healthcare transfers. If only we had prudent fiscal management, we could transfer the money to the provinces so that each province can make a decision for itself what coverage it wants to have for its citizens. That's the way Conservatives would have handled this.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments?
L'honorable député de Mirabel.
The Honourable Member from Mirabel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're going to repeat the same question again because it is the most important thing for us. Our colleague finished his speech and said that Ottawa is mismanaging public funds. My colleague says we should send the money to the provinces who have their own jurisdiction, should decide what to cover or not cover. You know, Quebec already has its own coverage, better than all other provinces. So in this context, how is it that last week a colleague voted against the Bloc sub-amendment to request to be able to opt out with full compensation for these federal spending programs that intervene in provincial jurisdiction? Did he change his mind? Does he support opt-out with full compensation as members of the Legislative Assembly supported unanimously?
So, Madam Speaker, we simply oppose this particular plan because we know that this plan is nothing more than the cost of the agreement between the NDP and the current federal government. It's not a serious agreement in the sense that we're actually getting a national Pharmacare program. So, as I said in my previous comments, which I would have already answered my colleague's question, this is much better delivered through provincial jurisdiction. And as an Albertan, and he as a Quebecer ought to know, there's one thing that Albertans and Quebecers often have in common. It's that we know how to look after our own people best, and we don't need these federal intrusions into provincial jurisdiction.
That's a good answer. Yeah.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe, a brief question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm curious. It's shown that the Conservative Party of Canada is actually riddled with corporate lobbyists in terms of its governing body, lobbyists for big oil, real estate, anti-union companies, insurance companies, big pharma, and it's in fact being used using those same talking points from those corporate entities in their conversations today against this bill. So ultimately, I would like to know if this member is actually defending his constituents or the corporate interests of those big lobbyists. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe has 1 minute to respond.
Well, Madam Speaker, I think the individual that just asked me the question had her answer in the question itself. Support for Big Pharma. Well, who's supporting Big Pharma with this piece of legislation? The NDP and the Liberals. National Pharmacare program will do more to help the pharmaceutical industry Why don't we just examine that for a second? Everything that they say they're for, they're also against. This speaks to the same hypocrisy that the NDP has on everything that they do. They want more pharmaceuticals, and they're supporting Big Pharma with this piece of legislation, more government money, more costs going to the pharmaceutical company, and accusing Conservatives of being in the pockets of Big Pharma. Ridiculous.
I do want to remind members, I know that there seem to be a few of them that were trying to participate in the answer of that question, and I would just say that, unfortunately, if they're not being recognized, they should hold off on their thoughts until they can be recognized.